The midday sun hammered Midtown Atlanta with the kind of relentless heat that turned asphalt into a shimmering mirage and made every breath feel like inhaling steam. Peachtree Street had been transformed into a festival of chrome and color, with over 40 food trucks arranged in neat rows along the blocked-off avenue, their generators humming beneath the cacophony of sizzling grills. Shouted orders and the excited chatter of thousands of hungry Atlantans who had descended upon the annual Midtown Food Fest. Lieutenant Sarah Collins stood at the intersection of Peachtree and 10th Street, her dark blue Atlanta PD uniform already showing sweat stains beneath the tactical vest. Beside her, K-9 Max sat with perfect discipline, his tan and black coat gleaming in the brutal sunlight, his intelligent brown eyes scanning the crowd with the focused intensity that had made him legendary within the department. His black tactical harness bore the APD insignia, and his tongue lolled slightly as he panted in the heat, but his attention never wavered. Sarah adjusted her sunglasses and surveyed the scene. The assignment was routine, at least on paper. With this many people packed into a concentrated area, the department wanted a visible K-9 presence for deterrence and rapid response capability. Most of these events passed without incident, nothing more than a few minor disputes over parking or the occasional pickpocket working the distracted crowds. But Max had been restless since they arrived 2 hours ago. Sarah had learned long ago to trust his instincts over any briefing document or operational assessment. 7 years of partnership had taught her that Max perceived things beyond human comprehension, that his nose could read stories written in molecules invisible to the human eye, that his ears could detect frequencies of danger that no radio could ever transmit. The crowd flowed around them like a river around stones, families with teenagers, couples on lunch dates, groups of office workers who had escaped their cubicles for an hour of culinary adventure. The air was thick with competing aromas, Korean barbecue battling Mexican carnitas, southern fried chicken wrestling with Mediterranean falafel. Somewhere nearby, a jazz quartet played beneath a canopy, their music weaving through the urban symphony of horns, laughter, and the persistent rumble of the city that never quite fell silent. Sarah's radio crackled. Dispatch was reporting all quiet across the festival perimeter. She acknowledged and returned her attention to Max, who had risen from his seated position and was now standing alert, his ears pricked forward, his nostrils flaring in rapid succession as he processed some invisible information stream. She followed his gaze down the row of food trucks. There were at least 15 visible from their position, each one a mobile kitchen wrapped in colorful graphics and clever branding. The Taco Titan with its cartoon luchador mascot, Soul Train featuring a stylized locomotive made of bulgogi, Waffle House on Wheels, which Sarah privately thought was pushing trademark boundaries, and there, about 60 feet away, positioned between a gelato truck and a craft coffee vendor, sat a silver Airstream trailer that had been converted into what the hand-painted sign proclaimed as the Golden Grill. Max took 3 steps toward it before Sarah's quiet command brought him back to heel, but his focus remained locked on that particular truck, his body language communicating volumes in the silent dialect that only years of partnership could translate. Something about that truck had captured his attention, and Max did not waste his attention on trivialities. Sarah studied the Golden Grill from a distance. It appeared unremarkable, perhaps even a bit shabby compared to its flashier neighbors. The silver skin of the Airstream was clean but showed its age, with small dents and scratches that spoke of years on the road. The serving window was open, and she could see a man inside working the grill, his movements quick and practiced as he assembled sandwiches for the modest line of customers waiting in the heat. The line was shorter than most of the other trucks, despite a prominent banner claiming best artisan sandwiches in Atlanta. Sarah noted this discrepancy. Good food at a food festival should draw crowds. Either the claim was exaggerated, Or something about the truck was keeping people away on an unconscious level. That subtle human instinct that could sense wrongness even when the conscious mind could identify nothing amiss. Max whined softly, a sound so quiet that only Sarah could hear it. She reached down and scratched behind his ear, a gesture that was both affection and communication. "Easy, partner. We will check it out." They moved through the crowd with the practiced fluidity of a team that had navigated far more dangerous terrain than a food festival. Sarah kept her posture casual, just a cop walking her beat. Nothing to see here. But her eyes were cataloguing everything. The customers in line, the configuration of the surrounding trucks, the sight lines and escape routes, the positions of the nearest uniformed officers stationed at various points throughout the festival. As they approached the Golden Grill, Max's behavior intensified. His nose worked overtime, pulling in scent information with rapid sniffs that seemed to accelerate with each step closer. His tail, usually carried in a relaxed curve during routine patrols, had gone rigid and horizontal, a posture Sarah recognized as active alert. The man working inside the truck glanced up as they approached, and Sarah caught the micro-expression that flickered across his face before he could suppress it. It lasted perhaps a quarter second, that flash of recognition, fear, and calculation that guilty men could never quite hide from trained observers. He was in his late 40s, heavy-set but not soft, with the thick forearms of someone who had spent years working with his hands. His head was shaved smooth, and a neatly trimmed grey beard framed a face that might have been friendly under different circumstances. Sarah stopped about 10 feet from the serving window, positioning herself at an angle that gave her a view of both the window and the rear of the truck. Max sat without being commanded, his focus so intense that he might have been carved from stone, except for the constant motion of his nostrils. "Good afternoon," Sarah said, keeping her tone conversational. "Busy day?" The man forced a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Sure is, officer. Can I get you something? Best Reuben in the city, I guarantee it." Sarah noticed the slight tremor in his hands as he gestured toward the menu board mounted above the window. She noticed the way his eyes kept darting toward Max, with something that looked very much like terror, barely contained beneath a thin veneer of hospitality. "I might take you up on that," she said. "This your truck?" "Yes, ma'am. Victor Harlan, owner and operator for 12 years now." He wiped his hands on his apron in a gesture that seemed more nervous than necessary. "Is there a problem?" Sarah tilted her head slightly, a gesture she had perfected over years of interrogations. It invited confidence, suggested sympathy, and usually prompted people to keep talking when silence would have been their best defense. "No problem," she said, "just making rounds." "Mind if I ask a few questions about your setup? We like to make sure all the vendors are squared away with permits and safety requirements." Victor nodded, perhaps a bit too eagerly. Of course. Everything is in order. Got my health department certification renewed last month. Fire extinguisher inspection is current. Propane tanks are all up to code." He gestured toward a clipboard hanging near the window. "Paperwork is all right there if you want to take a look." Sarah stepped closer to examine the documents while keeping Victor in her peripheral vision. The permits appeared legitimate, properly stamped and dated. Exactly what she would expect from a vendor who had been operating for over a decade. But paperwork could be forged, and legitimate permits did not explain why Max was now straining against his training. Every fiber of his being focused on the truck with an intensity that Sarah had only seen when he was closing in on a significant find. She handed the clipboard back to Victor. "Everything looks good. The festival committee said you have been on the circuit for a while." Victor relaxed slightly, misreading her comment as the conclusion of the encounter rather than the careful groundwork it actually represented. "Yeah, I do about 30 events a year. This is one of my favorites. Great crowd, good location, and the organizers actually know what they are doing." Sarah nodded, letting the silence stretch just long enough to become slightly uncomfortable. Victor filled it exactly as she expected he would. "Is there something else, officer? My partner here seems interested in your truck." Sarah gestured toward Max, who had not moved a muscle, but whose focused attention was unmistakable. "He is trained to detect certain things, explosives, narcotics, that sort of material." The color drained from Victor's face so quickly that Sarah thought he might faint. His hands gripped the edge of the serving counter with white-knuckled intensity, and his mouth opened and closed twice before any sound emerged. I do not. There must be some mistake." He was stammering now, all pretense of casual confidence evaporated. "I am just a cook. I make sandwiches. That is all I do." Sarah maintained her calm demeanor, even as her internal alert level climbed several notches. Victor's reaction was far beyond what an innocent man would display, but it also had a quality she had learned to recognize over years of police work. This was not the defiant fear of a career criminal caught in the act. This was the desperate terror of someone trapped in circumstances beyond their control. "Mr. Harlan," she said quietly, keeping her voice low enough that the nearby customers could not overhear, "I would like to take a look inside your truck. You can consent to a voluntary inspection, or I can get a warrant based on my K-9's alert. The warrant will take time and draw a lot more attention than a friendly walkthrough. Your choice." Victor's eyes darted around the festival crowd, and Sarah saw something that made her hand drift unconsciously toward her service weapon. He was not looking for an escape route. He was looking for someone specific. Scanning faces in the crowd with the panicked vigilance of prey, searching for a predator. "They will kill me," he whispered so quietly that Sarah almost missed it. "Who will kill you?" Victor shook his head rapidly. "You do not understand. You cannot understand. Please, officer, just walk away. Tell them the dog was wrong. Tell them you found nothing. Please." Sarah felt the familiar tightening in her gut that preceded every significant confrontation of her career. This was not a simple drug bust or weapons cache. Victor Harlan was terrified on a primal level, and his fear was not directed at her or at the consequences of whatever Max had detected. His fear was aimed at something else entirely, something that apparently scared him more than prison. "I cannot do that," she said, "but I can help you if you let me. Whatever this is, whatever you are mixed up in, cooperation is your best path forward." The line behind her had dispersed, customers sensing that something was wrong even if they could not identify what. The jazz music continued its cheerful backdrop, grotesquely inappropriate for the tension crackling in the air around the Golden Grill. Victor stood frozen for a long moment, caught between terrors, weighing impossible options. Then something in him seemed to collapse, a structural failure of the will that Sarah had witnessed in countless interrogation rooms when suspects finally accepted that their situation was beyond salvage. "You should come inside," he said, his voice hollow. "But please be careful who you tell about this. If the wrong people find out before you can protect me, I am a dead man. And maybe you are too." Sarah keyed her radio and requested backup to her position, keeping her transmission calm and professional, despite the adrenaline now surging through her system. She specified a low-profile approach, no lights or sirens, just 2 additional units to secure the perimeter. She walked around to the rear of the food truck, Max tight at her heel, every sense straining for danger. Victor met them at the back door, which he unlocked with hands that trembled so badly he dropped the keys twice before managing to fit them in the lock. The interior of the Golden Grill was cramped but efficiently organized. Exactly what Sarah would expect from a working food truck. Stainless steel prep surfaces, commercial cooking equipment, a small refrigerator, and at the far end, a large chest freezer that took up nearly a quarter of the available floor space. Max went straight for the freezer, not to the refrigerator with its perishable ingredients, not to any of the cabinets or storage compartments, but directly to the chest freezer, where he sat and pawed at the metal surface with his front leg, the classic indication signal he had been trained to perform when detecting target odors. Sarah looked at Victor. "Open it." Victor approached the freezer like a condemned man approaching the gallows. He lifted the lid, revealing what appeared to be exactly what one would expect. Stacks of frozen meat, bags of bread, containers of prepared ingredients, everything necessary to operate a sandwich business. But Max was not satisfied. He pushed his snout into the freezer, shoving aside packages of frozen beef with his nose, digging deeper into the contents with an urgency that told Sarah the real prize was still hidden. "There is a false bottom," Victor said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You have to take everything out, and there is a latch underneath the left corner." Sarah studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Show me." Victor began removing items from the freezer, stacking them on the prep counter with mechanical efficiency. As the frozen inventory diminished, Sarah could see what he meant. The interior of the freezer was shallower than its exterior dimensions suggested, leaving at least 18 inches of unaccounted space below the apparent bottom. When the freezer was empty, Victor reached in and pressed something Sarah could not see. There was a click, and the false bottom popped up slightly at one corner. Victor lifted it away, revealing a compartment lined with waterproof insulation. And there, packed in neat rows like evidence of sins, carefully organized for eventual discovery, lay the contents that had drawn Max through the noise and chaos of the festival. Sarah pulled on latex gloves from her utility belt and began cataloging what she saw. A stack of passports, at least 30 of them, various nations and colors, but all with the rigid newness that suggested recent manufacture. A bundle of documents that appeared to be birth certificates, social security cards, and driver's licenses, the building blocks of false identities. 3 external hard drives and a collection of USB flash drives. A thick manila envelope that proved to contain photographs, dozens of them, showing faces of women and men photographed against blank walls, their expressions ranging from confusion to terror, and beneath it all, bound stacks of currency in multiple denominations, dollars, euros, and what appeared to be British pounds. Sarah straightened and looked at Victor, who had pressed himself against the opposite wall of the truck, as far from the freezer as the cramped space would allow. "Start talking," she said. "From the beginning." Victor's story emerged in fragments at first, then in a flood, as the dam of his secrets finally broke. 3 years ago, he had been struggling. The food truck business was competitive, and a series of equipment failures had pushed him to the edge of bankruptcy. He had taken a loan from a man who operated a cash business in a part of town where questions were not asked and terms were not negotiable. When he could not make the payments, the man had offered an alternative arrangement. "Simple deliveries," the man had said. "No questions, no risks. Just drive your truck where we tell you, pick up packages and drop them off. Easy money. Enough to clear his debt and get back on his feet." Victor had known it was wrong. He had known that legitimate businesses did not operate in shadows and whispers, but desperation has a way of silencing conscience, and he had convinced himself that whatever he was transporting was probably just untaxed cash, or maybe some counterfeit goods. Nothing that would hurt anyone, nothing that would weigh too heavily on his soul. The first delivery had been exactly as described. A package picked up from a warehouse, transported across town, dropped at a parking garage. Easy. The second delivery was the same, and the third. Victor had allowed himself to believe that this was sustainable, that he could work off his debt and walk away clean. But on the fourth delivery, something had gone wrong. The package had broken open in transit, and Victor had seen what was inside. Not drugs, not counterfeit merchandise, passports, identification documents, photographs of people who did not look like willing participants in whatever scheme required their faces to be matched with false papers. He had tried to walk away. He had gone to the man who held his debt and said he was done, that he would find another way to pay, that he wanted no part of whatever this was. The man had smiled, patient and cold, and had shown Victor another set of photographs. His sister in Savannah, his elderly mother in the nursing home in Marietta, his ex-wife and her new husband in their suburban home. "You are part of this now," the man had said. "You stay part of it until we say otherwise, or we make some deliveries of our own." That had been 2 years ago. Since then, Victor had transported packages to and from dozens of locations across the Southeast. He had learned not to look, not to ask, not to think about what the documents and data he carried were being used for. He had become a ghost in his own life, going through the motions of running his business, while serving as an unwilling courier for something he understood only in nightmarish fragments. The cash Max had discovered was a recent pickup, collected from a warehouse in Chambly just 3 days ago. He was supposed to deliver it tomorrow to a location in Buckhead, instructions to follow via text message. The usual procedure. Sarah listened to all of this while her backup officers secured the perimeter and began the process of documenting the scene. She had called for detectives from the organized crime unit, recognizing that what she had stumbled into was far beyond a routine patrol discovery. "Who is he?" she asked when Victor finished. "The man who has you doing this." "What is his name?" Victor laughed. "A broken sound with no humor in it. I do not know his real name. Nobody does. Everyone just calls him the accountant. He runs the books for people you do not want to know about. Money, documents, information, people. If it needs to move without leaving a trace, it goes through him." Sarah processed this, filing away the moniker for later research. "How do you contact him?" "I do not. He contacts me. Burner phones, encrypted messages, always different numbers. When there is a job, I get a text with coordinates and a time. That is all I ever know until I get there. And the deliveries. Do you know where they ultimately go? Who receives them?" Victor shook his head. "Dead drops mostly. I leave packages in locations and walk away. Sometimes there are people waiting, but they never talk to me. And I learned early not to look at their faces. It is safer that way, for them and for me." Sarah stepped out of the truck to confer with the arriving detectives. Max remained at her side, his job done, but his alertness undiminished. She briefed the organized crime team on what Victor had revealed, watching their expressions shift from skepticism to intense interest as the scope of the discovery became clear. Detective Marcus Webb, a 15-year veteran who had spent the last decade chasing human trafficking networks through the labyrinth of Atlanta's criminal underworld, examined the contents of the hidden compartment with the reverence of an archaeologist uncovering a significant find. "This is professional work," he said, holding up one of the passports to the light. "High-quality forgeries, good enough to pass casual inspection at most border crossings." He flipped through the photographs in the envelope, his jaw tightening as he studied the faces. "These are inventory photos. They take them when new victims are brought into the pipeline. Documentation for buyers." Sarah felt her stomach turn. "Buyers? Human trafficking is a business," Webb said, his voice flat with the detachment that came from seeing too much of humanity's darkness. "These networks process people like commodities, men for labor, women for various purposes, all catalogued and tracked like merchandise. The documents your K-9 found, they are operational files. Transit papers, identity packages, delivery instructions. This is not some amateur operation. This is infrastructure." Sarah looked back at the food truck, where Victor sat on the rear bumper with his head in his hands, flanked by uniformed officers. "He is claiming coercion. Says they threatened his family." Webb nodded. "That is how they build their distribution networks. Find people with legitimate businesses who are vulnerable, desperate, drowning in debt or addiction or some other leverage point. Apply pressure until they cooperate, then keep them in line with threats against the people they love. Your food truck guy, he is probably telling the truth about being forced into this. But that does not make him innocent. Every delivery he made helped move people through the pipeline. What happens to him now? Webb sighed. That depends on how much he can give us. If he cooperates fully, provides actionable intelligence on this accountant character and the larger network, the DA might consider reduced charges in exchange for testimony. But that is above my pay grade. Right now, we need to get him into protective custody before whoever he works for realizes their courier has been compromised. As if summoned by the words, Sarah's radio crackled with an urgent transmission. A black SUV had just pulled up to the festival perimeter, 4 men inside, and they were arguing with the officers manning the checkpoint. The confrontation was escalating. Webb and Sarah exchanged glances. That is not a coincidence, he said. Sarah looked down at Max, who had risen to his feet, his body language shifting from alert to combat ready. She checked her sidearm, ensuring it was loose in its holster. Get Harlan out of here, she told Webb. Back entrance, unmarked vehicle, direct to the precinct. Do not stop for anything. She did not wait for a response. She was already moving toward the perimeter, Max keeping pace beside her, weaving through the festival crowd that remained blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding at its edges. The checkpoint was a scene of barely contained chaos when Sarah arrived. 4 men in dark suits stood in a semicircle around 2 uniformed officers, their postures aggressive, their voices loud enough to draw attention from nearby festival-goers. The black SUV idled behind them, its engine running, its tinted windows hiding whatever waited inside. The man doing most of the talking was tall and angular, with the kind of lean, predatory build that suggested either professional athletics or professional violence. His suit was expensive, his haircut precise, and his eyes held the flat, calculating gaze of someone who had long ago stopped seeing other humans as anything more than obstacles or opportunities. Sarah pushed through the small crowd of onlookers that had gathered, her badge visible on her chest, Max at her heel. The appearance of the K-9 unit had an immediate effect on the 4 men. They went still, reassessing, their aggressive postures shifting to something more guarded. I am Lieutenant Collins, Sarah announced, positioning herself between the men and her officers. What seems to be the problem here? The tall man turned his attention to her, and Sarah felt the weight of his assessment, the quick calculation of threat level and leverage. His lips curved into something that might have been a smile under different circumstances. Lieutenant, we seem to have a misunderstanding with your colleagues. My associates and I are here to pick up a vendor from the festival, family emergency, but these officers are insisting we cannot enter without proper credentials. Sarah kept her expression neutral. Which vendor? A man named Victor Harlan. He operates a food truck here. We received word that his mother has taken ill, and we offered to drive him to the hospital. The lie was smooth, delivered without hesitation, but Sarah had spent too many years parsing truth from deception to miss the subtle tells. The man's eyes did not match his concerned words. His associates were positioned not like friends on an errand of mercy, but like a tactical team, preparing for extraction. I see, Sarah said. That is very considerate of you. Unfortunately, Mr. Harlan is currently assisting us with an investigation. He will not be available for some time. Something flickered in the tall man's eyes. Investigation? Routine matter. Nothing for you to concern yourself with. She paused, letting the silence stretch. You said you received word about his mother. From whom? The man's smile remained fixed, but the temperature behind it dropped several degrees. A mutual friend. I do not recall the exact details. Sarah nodded slowly. Well, I will make sure Mr. Harlan knows you stopped by. Can I get your name and contact information? in case he wants to reach out when he's finished with us." For a long moment, the tall man simply stared at her, and Sarah could feel the calculation happening behind his eyes, the weighing of options, the assessment of risks. Max stood rigid at her side, a low growl building in his chest, barely audible but communicating volumes to anyone who knew how to listen. "That will not be necessary," the man finally said. "I am sure our friend will understand." He held Sarah's gaze for another beat, a silent promise of future reckoning, then turned and walked back to the SUV. His associates followed without a word. Sarah watched them drive away, memorizing the license plate, the make and model of the vehicle, the faces of the men she had glimpsed through the windshield. She keyed her radio and quietly relayed the information to dispatch, requesting a trace on the plates and surveillance on the vehicle's movements. The festival continued around her, thousands of people enjoying their Saturday afternoon, utterly unaware of how close they had come to witnessing something ugly. Sarah permitted herself a moment to appreciate the cognitive dissonance, the strange dual nature of cities where darkness and light existed in parallel dimensions, separated by nothing more than awareness. Max pressed against her leg, and she reached down to scratch behind his ears. "Good work today, partner. Very good work." The K-9 looked up at her with eyes that held an intelligence she had never quite been able to define, something that transcended training and conditioning, something that felt almost like understanding. He had known. Somehow, through the chaos of scents and sounds and stimuli that assaulted them at the festival, he had known that the Golden Grill held secrets worth finding. Sarah's phone buzzed, a text from Detective Webb. Victor was secure at the precinct, already talking to investigators, providing names and dates and locations that were sending ripples through the department. This was going to be big. This was going to be the kind of case that made careers and broke networks and maybe, just maybe, saved lives that would otherwise have disappeared into the machinery of human commerce. She looked out at the festival one more time, at the families and couples and friends enjoying simple pleasures on a hot Atlanta afternoon. Then she turned and walked toward her vehicle, Max padding alongside her, ready for whatever came next. The precinct was controlled chaos when Sarah arrived. Victor Harlan sat in an interview room, surrounded by detectives and federal agents who had materialized with surprising speed once the nature of the discovery became clear. The FBI had a task force dedicated to human trafficking in the Southeast Corridor, and the documents recovered from the food truck had immediately triggered their involvement. Sarah observed through the one-way glass as Victor walked the investigators through his involvement, his voice hoarse from hours of continuous talking. He was cooperative to the point of desperation, clearly understanding that his only hope for survival lay in becoming more valuable as a witness than as a liability. The picture that emerged from his testimony was deeply disturbing. The accountant, whoever he was, operated as a critical node in a network that spanned multiple states and multiple criminal enterprises. He provided logistical support for human traffickers, money launderers, and document forgers, managing the complex flow of people, paper, and currency that kept the machinery running. Victor was just one of many unwilling couriers, recruited through debt and controlled through fear, a disposable component in a system designed to insulate its principles from exposure. More significant than Victor's role, however, were the external hard drives recovered from the freezer compartment. Forensic analysis was already underway, and preliminary reports suggested they contained detailed records of transactions spanning several years. Names, dates, amounts, and coordinates, a digital paper trail that could potentially expose the entire network. Captain Rodriguez found Sarah in the observation room, her expression mixing satisfaction with concern. "Your K-9 kicked over one hell of a hornet's nest today," she said. "FBI is salivating over those hard drives. They think this might connect to operations they have been tracking for years." Sarah nodded, her eyes still on Victor through the glass. "Those men at the festival checkpoint, they knew we had him before we even moved him." The captain's jaw tightened. "We are looking into that. Could be they have someone on the inside, or maybe they have surveillance on their couriers that we did not anticipate. Either way, we are treating this as a compromised operation. Everyone involved is being vetted, and all communications are going through secure channels only." "What about Victor's family? Already in protective custody? Sister, mother, ex-wife. They are confused and scared, but they are safe." The captain paused. "He is going to need that safety. The kind of people who run networks like this, they do not forgive betrayal, even unintentional betrayal." Sarah thought about the tall man at the checkpoint, the flat promise in his eyes. "They are going to come for him. They are going to try," the captain agreed. "Which is why we are moving him to federal custody as soon as the initial interviews are complete. This is too big for local protection now." She placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "You did good work today, Lieutenant. You and Max both. Whatever happens next, remember that. A lot of people might be saved because of what you found in that freezer." Sarah accepted the acknowledgement without feeling. She had been in law enforcement long enough to know that victories in cases like this were always incomplete, always shadowed by the knowledge that the people they caught were replaceable, that the systems they exposed would adapt and continue, that somewhere out there, other victims were being processed through pipelines they had not yet discovered. She found Max in the K-9 unit break room, lying on his bed in the corner, accepting belly rubs from Officer Chen, who handled one of the other department dogs. Max's tail wagged lazily as Sarah approached, but he did not rise from his comfortable position. "Hero of the hour," Chen said, grinning. "I heard he sniffed out a whole trafficking operation from inside a sandwich truck." "He has a gift," Sarah said, kneeling to scratch Max behind the ears. "I just follow where he leads." She stayed with Max for a while, enjoying the quiet moment of connection after the intensity of the day. These intervals were precious, the spaces between crises where they could simply exist as partners, as friends, as two beings who had somehow found each other in the chaos of the world and discovered something worth protecting. Her phone buzzed again. Detective Webb, requesting her presence in the conference room. The federal task force wanted to debrief her on the checkpoint confrontation, and there were questions about the timeline of events that only she could answer. Sarah rose, gave Max a final pat, and headed back into the storm. The conference room was crowded with law enforcement from multiple agencies, an alphabet soup of badges and jurisdictions united by the common purpose of dismantling what they were beginning to understand was a significant criminal enterprise. FBI, DEA, HSI, and the GBI had all sent representatives, their territorial instincts temporarily suppressed by the magnitude of the opportunity. Special Agent Diana Reyes led the briefing, her sharp features projected onto the room's main screen alongside surveillance photos and organizational charts. She was small and intense, with the rapid-fire delivery of someone who processed information faster than most people could receive it. "What we are looking at," she said, advancing through slides filled with faces and names and connection lines, "is a support network for multiple criminal enterprises operating in the Southeast. The accountant, as he is known, provides documentation services, logistics coordination, and financial management for human traffickers, drug organizations, and various other operators. He is not the top of any pyramid. He is more like," she paused, searching for the right analogy, "like a utility company. He provides essential services that keep the lights on for multiple criminal households." Sarah studied the organizational chart, noting the empty box at the center where the accountant's identity should have been. "You do not know who he is." Reyes shook her head. "We have been tracking his work for 3 years. The quality is consistent, the methodology is distinctive, but the man himself is a ghost, No verified photographs, no confirmed addresses, no pattern of personal contact. He communicates exclusively through intermediaries and encrypted channels. Even his own clients do not meet him face to face. Then how do you know he exists at all? Because his work exists. Reyes pulled up a slide showing forged documents side by side with authentic versions. These are some of the best forgeries we have ever seen. Consistent style, consistent quality, consistent sourcing of materials. One person or one very small team working with incredible skill and discipline. We have intercepted communications that reference the accountant as a known quantity, someone whose services are sought and whose reputation is established. He is real. We just cannot find him. Until maybe now, Detective Webb interjected. The hard drives we recovered, if they contain what Victor says they contain, they might give us our first real look at his operations. Reyes nodded, her expression cautiously optimistic. Forensics is working through the encryption now. Initial indications are promising. The data is extensive and appears to be comprehensive. Financial records, client lists, operational protocols. If we can crack it fully, this could be the breakthrough we have been waiting for. Sarah thought about the men at the checkpoint, their professional bearing, their expensive suits, the smooth lie about Victor's mother. What about the people who tried to extract Victor? Any progress on identifying them? The SUV was a rental, Reyes said, pulling up another slide. Paid for with a stolen credit card, picked up from the airport location this morning. The men inside, we ran facial recognition on the security footage from the festival perimeter. 2 of them flagged in our databases. Low-level enforcers with ties to a crew that operates out of Buckhead. Money laundering, some muscle work, occasional wet jobs when required. Not the kind of people who would be running an operation like the accountants, but exactly the kind of people who might provide security services for someone like him. So they work for him, or for someone who works with him. The accountant's business model depends on trust and discretion. He would not send his own people for a retrieval like this. Too much exposure. More likely he contracted the job to an outside crew, people who could handle a simple extraction without knowing the full context. It was not simple, Sarah said. They showed up within an hour of us finding the compartment. Someone knew Victor had been compromised almost as soon as it happened. The room fell silent as the implications of that statement settled over the assembled investigators. Reyes exchanged glances with several of her colleagues, a wordless acknowledgement of a possibility no one wanted to voice. "We are aware," she finally said, "that there may be a leak somewhere in our operation. Standard protocols are in place. Compartmentalized information, secure communications, vetting of all personnel with access to sensitive details." She paused. "This is not the first time we have encountered this problem. The accountants' network has demonstrated an ability to anticipate law enforcement actions before. Either they have sophisticated surveillance capabilities, or they have human sources in positions to observe our operations." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the conference room's air conditioning. A leak could mean anything. A corrupt officer, an informant playing both sides, an electronic intrusion into their communications. Any of those possibilities meant that the safety of everyone involved in this investigation was compromised, potentially including Victor, potentially including herself. "What about Victor?" she asked. "If they have someone inside, they know where he is." "He is being transferred to federal custody within the hour," Reyes assured her. "Secure facility, limited access, no electronic communications. He will be safe." "And my K-9 unit? We are the ones who made the initial discovery. If they are looking for revenge or trying to send a message, we are obvious targets." Reyes studied her for a moment, assessing. "We will provide security details for you and any other officers directly involved in the discovery. 24-hour protection until we can assess the threat level more accurately." Sarah wanted to argue that she did not need protection, that she was capable of handling herself, that Max was a better security system than any human detail could provide. But she was not stupid, and pride had no place in threat assessment. She nodded her acceptance. The briefing continued for another hour, covering operational details, communication protocols, and assignment of responsibilities. By the time it concluded, Sarah's head was spinning with information, and her body was aching for rest. She had been on duty for over 12 hours, and the adrenaline that had sustained her through the initial discovery and its aftermath was finally beginning to fade. She found Max waiting for her in the K-9 unit, his tail wagging at her approach. Officer Chen had gone home, leaving Max in his crate with fresh water and a few treats. Sarah knelt to greet him, accepting his enthusiastic face licks with the tolerance born of long partnership. "Ready to go home, boy?" Max's answer was to spin in a tight circle, his universal signal for excitement and agreement. Sarah gathered his gear, signed them both out, and headed for the parking structure where her personal vehicle waited. The night had fallen while she was inside, the Atlanta skyline glittering against a sky that had gone from blue to purple to black. The air remained warm even in darkness, that peculiar southern humidity that made summer nights feel like being wrapped in damp cloth. Sarah loaded Max into the SUV's back compartment, secured his travel crate, and slid behind the wheel. The drive home should have been routine. 20 minutes through light, late-night traffic, residential streets growing quieter as she approached her neighborhood. But Sarah found herself checking her mirrors more than usual, noting vehicles that seemed to maintain consistent distance behind her, analyzing patterns that might indicate surveillance. She was being paranoid. She knew she was being paranoid. But paranoia was a survival mechanism, and the day's events had triggered all of her professional instincts. Her house was a modest craftsman bungalow in a quiet neighborhood east of downtown, a far cry from the sleek condos and townhouses that many of her colleagues preferred. Sarah had chosen it for the yard, a fenced half-acre that gave Max room to run and play, and for the sense of permanence it provided. In a career defined by transience and uncertainty, having a place that felt like home mattered. She pulled into the driveway, scanning the street by habit before cutting the engine. Nothing unusual. The neighbor's porch light glowed yellow, a cat prowled the shadows beneath the oak tree 3 houses down, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked at imagined intruders. Sarah let Max out of his crate and walked him around the perimeter of the property, allowing him to do his evening business while she checked the fence line and the exterior of the house. Everything appeared normal. No signs of tampering, no unfamiliar vehicles parked within sight, no feeling of being watched. Still, she found herself double-checking the locks after they went inside, confirming that the security system was armed, positioning her service weapon on the nightstand within easy reach. Max sensed her unease and stationed himself at the foot of her bed, his ears pricked for any sound that might require investigation. Sleep came reluctantly, and when it did, it brought dreams of freezers and false compartments, of men in dark suits and the flat promise in a tall man's eyes, of faces in photographs looking at her with silent accusation. She woke several times in the night, heart pounding, reaching for a weapon that was already in her hand, finding only Max's warm presence and the quiet sounds of a house at rest. Morning came grey and overcast, the previous day's sunshine replaced by the thick cloud cover that often preceded Atlanta's summer storms. Sarah moved through her routine with mechanical efficiency, showering, dressing, feeding Max, checking her phone for updates. There were several. Victor had been successfully transferred to federal custody, location classified. Forensic analysis of the hard drives was proceeding, with preliminary data extraction expected by midday. The FBI's surveillance teams had lost track of the black SUV from the festival, but were running down leads on the Buckhead crew whose members had been identified. And there was one message that made her pause, a text from a number she did not recognize. The dog should not have found what he found, neither should you. Let it go. This is your only warning. Sarah stared at the screen for a long moment, feeling the cold certainty of threat settling into her bones. They knew her number. They knew what she and Max had discovered, and they wanted her to know that they knew. She forwarded the message to Agent Reyes with a brief explanation, then called the number back. It rang once and went to a recording informing her that the number she had dialed was not in service. Burner phone, just like Victor had described. Untraceable, disposable, designed for single use and immediate destruction. Max was watching her from his spot by the kitchen door, his head tilted in that way he had when he was trying to pass human behavior. Sarah went to him, knelt down, and let him press his forehead against hers. "We do not scare easy, do we, boy?" Max's tail wagged once, a simple affirmation. They arrived at the precinct to find the security detail Agent Reyes had promised, 2 plainclothes federal marshals who would shadow Sarah's movements throughout the day. She bristled at their presence, but accepted it with professional grace, understanding that refusing protection would be foolish rather than brave. The morning was consumed by paperwork and follow-up interviews, the bureaucratic aftermath of the previous day's discovery. Sarah recounted the sequence of events multiple times for multiple agencies, each repetition stripping away more of the emotional intensity and leaving behind only the clinical facts. Shortly before noon, Agent Reyes convened another briefing. The forensic team had made significant progress on the hard drives. "What we have found," Reyes announced, her voice tight with controlled excitement, "is essentially the accountant's entire operation for the past 4 years. Client lists, transaction records, communication logs, even some encrypted correspondence that our people are working to crack. This is the most comprehensive look we have ever had at how this network operates." The room buzzed with anticipation. This was the kind of intelligence breakthrough that law enforcement dreamed about, the motherlode of evidence that could dismantle entire organizations. Reyes continued, "We have identified over 40 clients who have used the accountant's services during this period. Human traffickers, drug distributors, money launderers, weapons dealers. Some names we recognize from ongoing investigations. Others are new to us." She pulled up a slide showing a web of connections. This network touches operations in 6 states and at least 3 foreign countries. Sarah studied the organizational chart, noting how the accountant sat at the center like a spider in an invisible web. Every connection passed through him. Every transaction was facilitated by his services. Every criminal enterprise depended on his infrastructure. "What about his identity?" she asked. "Do the records tell us who he actually is?" Reyes's expression flickered with frustration. "Not directly. He refers to himself only by that code name in all internal documents, but we have found something potentially more valuable." She advanced to a new slide. Payment records. The accountant did not work for free, and his clients paid him through a series of shell companies and cryptocurrency wallets. Our financial analysts are tracing those payments backward, trying to find the ultimate destination. "The trail of money," Detective Webb observed. "Follow it long enough, and it always leads somewhere." "That is the theory," Reyes agreed. "But the accountant is sophisticated. Multiple layers of obfuscation, jurisdictional complications, technical barriers. It could take weeks or months to unravel fully." She paused. "However, we did find something more immediately actionable. Operational schedules. The hard drives contain detailed records of planned activities, including several transactions that are scheduled to occur within the next few days." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Active operations. 3 of them. Reyes pulled up a map of the Atlanta metropolitan area with 3 locations marked. "A document delivery tomorrow evening in Decatur. a money transfer the day after in Marietta, and most significantly, she zoomed in on the third location, a warehouse district in the industrial zone near the airport, what appears to be the movement of human cargo scheduled for 3 days from now. The room went silent. Human cargo, the clinical term for people being transported against their will, stripped of autonomy and identity, reduced to commodities in the ledgers of monsters. "We have to move on this," someone said. Sarah was not sure who. Reyes nodded. "That is the plan. We are coordinating with local law enforcement and federal assets to interdict all 3 operations. The document delivery and the money transfer are lower priority, but we want to disrupt them to prevent evidence from being destroyed or moved. The human trafficking shipment is the primary target." She looked around the room, making eye contact with each person present. "I do not need to tell you how important this is. If those people get loaded onto a truck and disappear into the network, we may never find them again. We have 3 days to plan and execute a rescue operation. Failure is not an option." The remainder of the briefing was dedicated to operational planning, dividing responsibilities, assigning resources, and establishing protocols. Sarah found herself assigned to the warehouse surveillance team, responsible for monitoring the target location and providing real-time intelligence to the tactical units that would execute the actual interdiction. It was not the frontline role she would have preferred, but she understood the logic. Her K-9 unit was designed for detection work, not tactical assault, and Max's skills would be more valuable in the search that followed the operation than in the operation itself. As the briefing concluded, Reyes pulled Sarah aside. "The threat against you. We take it seriously." Sarah shrugged. "They want me scared. I do not scare." Reyes studied her with an evaluating gaze. "That is admirable. But consider the possibility that they want more than fear. If they believe you are a threat to their operation, elimination becomes a practical consideration. Then I will be careful. Be more than careful." Reyes handed her a card with a number written on it. "My direct line, day or night. Any concerns, you call. We did not get this far just to lose people to these animals." Sarah pocketed the card and went to collect Max from the K-9 unit. He greeted her with his usual enthusiasm, seemingly unaware of the gravity of the situation, existing entirely in the present moment without the burden of anticipation and fear that humans carried. They spent the afternoon on routine patrol, a return to normalcy that felt almost surreal after the previous day's revelations. The city continued its ordinary business. Millions of people going about their lives, utterly unaware of the darkness that operated just beneath the surface of their world. Sarah found herself looking at the streets differently now, seeing potential threats in passing vehicles, reading hidden meanings into casual glances. The weight of knowledge was a burden, transforming the familiar into something uncertain and potentially hostile. They responded to a few calls, nothing significant. A report of suspicious behavior that turned out to be a homeless man sleeping in a doorway. An assist request from Traffic Division for a search of a vehicle pulled over for expired tags, which Max cleared in seconds. No contraband present. An appearance at a community event where Sarah answered questions from curious citizens, while Max performed tricks and accepted belly rubs from delighted volunteers. These moments mattered, Sarah reminded herself. The connection between law enforcement and community, the simple humanity of showing up and being present, the trust that was built through countless small interactions. The darkness she was fighting against existed because people like the accountant had learned to exploit systems and vulnerabilities, but those exploitations were only possible because humans remained capable of kindness and connection and faith in their fellow beings. If that faith disappeared, the darkness would have already won. Evening came, and with it a summons back to the precinct. The first of the three operations, the document delivery in Decatur, was being finalized for execution the following day. Sarah was expected at the planning session. She left Max with the K-9 night staff and joined the tactical briefing, where she learned that her role would be limited to perimeter surveillance during the Decatur operation. The actual interdiction would be handled by the FBI's hostage rescue team, whose members had the training and equipment for high-risk warrant execution. The Decatur target was a storage facility, one of those anonymous places where people kept their excess belongings and criminal organizations kept things they wanted to remain hidden. According to the recovered files, a courier would arrive at a specific unit at 9 the following evening to pick up a package of documents. The plan was to allow the courier to enter, then seal the facility and apprehend everyone present. Simple, the team leader said. Clean entry, overwhelming force, minimal opportunity for resistance, by the book. Sarah had heard those words before. They were usually accurate. But sometimes the book failed to account for variables that only became apparent in the chaos of execution. She returned home late, the security detail following at a discreet distance. Max was tired from the day's activities and fell asleep almost immediately, his breathing slowing into the deep rhythm of K-9 contentment. Sarah envied his ability to let go, to release the tensions of the day and surrender to rest without the endless churning of human anxiety. Sleep came easier this night, whether from exhaustion or adaptation or some combination of both. Her dreams were less troubled, though she woke once to the sound of a car passing slowly on her street. Lying rigid in the darkness until Max's continued slumber convinced her that no real threat was present. The day of the Decatur operation began unremarkably. Sarah maintained her routine, walked Max, reviewed the operational plan, and arrived at the staging point 2 hours before execution time. The surveillance team set up in a vacant office building across from the storage facility, establishing sight lines to the target and monitoring the feed from cameras that had been covertly installed during the previous night. As darkness fell, the operation began its final preparations. Teams moved into position, communications were checked and rechecked, and the focused intensity of professionals preparing for action filled the air with electric potential. At 8:45, a vehicle pulled into the storage facility parking lot. A single individual emerged, male, mid-30s, wearing a baseball cap and carrying a backpack. He moved with purpose toward the target unit, unlocking it with a key and disappearing inside. "All units stand by," the team leader murmured over the radio. "Execute on my mark." Sarah watched through binoculars as additional vehicles converged on the facility from multiple directions, moving without lights, positioning themselves at exits and choke points. The net was closing. 3, 2, 1. Mark. The assault was textbook. Teams breached the facility perimeter simultaneously, flooding the access corridors with overwhelming force. The courier had no opportunity to flee, no chance to destroy evidence, no time to alert anyone of what was happening. Within seconds, he was face down on the concrete with his hands secured behind his back. "Package secured," the team leader announced. "No casualties, no complications." Sarah allowed herself a moment of satisfaction before remembering that this was only the first of 3 operations. The document delivery was significant but not critical. The real test would come in 2 days, when they moved on the warehouse and the human cargo scheduled to pass through it. The courier was transported to the precinct for interrogation, and Sarah found herself observing through the one-way glass again, watching another frightened man answer questions about things he claimed not to fully understand. Like Victor, he presented himself as a small fish, caught in a large net, a delivery driver, paid in cash, who never asked questions about what he carried. Unlike Victor, however, he had no leverage to offer. He knew nothing about the accountant, nothing about the larger network, nothing that could advance the investigation beyond what the hard drives had already revealed. He was exactly what he claimed to be, a disposable component, interchangeable and forgettable, valued only for his willingness to not ask questions. Sarah left the precinct feeling dissatisfied. The operation had succeeded technically, but it felt hollow. They had caught a courier, seized some documents, and plugged one small hole in a network that had hundreds of others. The real victory would require dismantling the infrastructure itself, cutting the head from the snake, and tonight had brought them no closer to that goal. The second operation, the money transfer in Marietta, proceeded similarly the following day. Another anonymous location, another small-time courier, another technically successful interdiction that felt more like treating symptoms than curing the disease. The accountant's network was designed to absorb these losses, Sarah realized. The captured couriers would be replaced, the disrupted operations would be reconstituted, and the essential machinery would continue to function. Everything depended on the warehouse operation. The day of the third operation dawned hot and clear, the Atlanta sun blazing from a cloudless sky like a judgment. Sarah arrived at the forward command post 6 hours before execution time, joining a team that had grown to include dozens of personnel from multiple agencies. The target warehouse was part of a cluster of industrial buildings near the airport, a nondescript facility surrounded by similar nondescript facilities, anonymous and unremarkable in every way. According to the recovered files, a shipment of human cargo was scheduled to arrive that evening, processed through the warehouse, and then loaded onto transport vehicles for distribution to final destinations throughout the southeast. Agent Reyes led the final briefing. Intelligence indicates between 15 and 30 victims in transit. Mixed demographics, mostly adults, primarily foreign nationals with uncertain legal status. The transport vehicle is expected to arrive between 8 and 9 this evening. Our objective is to interdict the shipment before unloading is complete, secure the victims, and apprehend all operational personnel present. She pulled up satellite imagery of the warehouse and surrounding area, primary entry through the loading dock here, secondary teams at these access points, surveillance positions here, here, and here. She indicated each location on the map. Lieutenant Collins, your K-9 unit will be positioned with the secondary entry team. Once the building is secured, you and Max will sweep for concealed victims. The traffickers sometimes separate groups within a facility. We cannot afford to miss anyone. Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle onto her shoulders. Understood. The briefing continued, with detailed discussion of contingencies, communication protocols, and rules of engagement. By the time it concluded, Sarah felt like she had memorized the warehouse floor plan, could navigate its corridors in her sleep, knew every possible hiding spot and escape route. The hours until execution time passed with excruciating slowness. Sarah reviewed her equipment, checked Max's gear, ran through the operational plan a dozen times in her mind. The sun crept across the sky, shadows lengthened, and the light shifted from gold to orange to purple as evening approached. At 7:30, the teams moved to final staging positions. Sarah found a spot in the back of an unmarked van with the secondary entry team. Max pressed against her leg, his body vibrating with contained energy as he sensed the approaching action. Primary surveillance reports no activity at target. A voice crackled over the radio. Standing by. The minutes stretched. 7:45. 8 o'clock. 8:15. Still no movement at the warehouse, no sign of the expected transport, no indication that anything was about to happen. At 8:30, a voice broke the silence. We have vehicle approaching from the south. Large truck, commercial configuration, heading toward target. Sarah felt her pulse accelerate. This was it. The truck pulled into the warehouse loading area, its headlights sweeping across the empty concrete before cutting off. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the warehouse doors began to open, sliding apart to reveal the lit interior beyond. "All units, prepare for entry." The team leader's voice was calm, professional. "Execute on my command." Sarah watched through the van's tinted windows as the truck backed into the loading dock, its brake lights casting red shadows on the pavement. Figures emerged from the warehouse to meet it, silhouettes against the interior lights, their movements purposeful and organized. Execute, execute, execute. The night erupted into controlled chaos. Vehicles surged forward from concealed positions, sirens screaming to life, lights strobing against the industrial landscape. Teams converged on the warehouse from multiple directions, breaching points, overwhelming surprise defenders who had no time to react. Sarah's team hit the secondary entrance, the door yielding to a breaching tool with a crash of tortured metal. They swept through a hallway, clearing rooms with textbook precision, moving toward the main warehouse floor. What they found there would haunt Sarah for years to come. The victims were already being unloaded from the truck, herded into the warehouse like livestock arriving at market. 18 women and 6 men, their eyes vacant with exhaustion and fear, their wrists marked with the red chafing of restraints. They huddled together as the tactical teams poured in, unable to distinguish rescue from new threat, too battered by experience to trust that anything could save them. The traffickers attempted to flee, but escape routes had been anticipated and blocked. One by one, they were brought down, cuffed, and processed, their protests and excuses falling on deaf ears. Within minutes, the warehouse was secured, the immediate threat neutralized, and the slow work of recovery could begin. Sarah unleashed Max, sending him into the depths of the warehouse with a single command. He moved through the space like a ghost, his nose parsing the complex tapestry of scents, searching for hidden victims who might have been overlooked. He found 2 more in a back office, a man and a woman locked in a windowless room, too weak from dehydration to call out when they heard the sounds of rescue. Sarah broke the lock and helped them into the care of waiting paramedics, their whispered thanks in languages she did not understand, transcending any need for translation. The aftermath of the operation stretched through the night and into the following morning. Victims were transported to hospitals for medical evaluation and eventually to protective services for processing. Traffickers were transported to detention facilities to await the long judicial process that would determine their fate. Evidence was catalogued, statements were taken, and the slow reconstruction of what had been discovered began. Sarah found Agent Reyes near the loading dock as the sun began to rise, both of them running on caffeine and adrenaline, the satisfaction of the rescue tempered by the exhaustion of the effort. 24 people, Reyes said. 24 people who would have disappeared into the system if your dog had not smelled something wrong in a food truck. Sarah shook her head. Max did the hard part. I just followed his lead. Reyes smiled, the first genuine expression of warmth Sarah had seen from her. We still do not have the accountant. The trail from the hard drives is promising, but it could take months to follow to its conclusion. This is not over. But it is something, Sarah said. For those 24 people, it is everything. The days following the warehouse operation brought a cascade of revelations and consequences. The captured traffickers, facing overwhelming evidence and seeking leverage for reduced sentences, began to provide information about the network's operations. Piece by piece, a picture emerged of an organization that had operated with impunity for years, processing human beings through a supply chain designed for efficiency and deniability. The financial trail from the hard drives yielded its own dividends. The FBI's forensic accountants traced payments through shell companies and cryptocurrency exchanges, following the money through layers of obfuscation toward its ultimate destination. Progress was slow, measured in subpoenas and court orders and international cooperation requests, but it was progress. Sarah returned to routine duty, the extraordinary events of the past week receding into memory as the ordinary demands of the job reasserted themselves. But something had changed, some fundamental understanding of the stakes involved in her work that could not be unlearned. Max, for his part, seemed entirely unaffected. He continued to approach each day with the same enthusiasm and focus he had always displayed, finding joy in work and play alike, unburdened by the philosophical weight that his discoveries had placed on his human partner. 3 weeks after the warehouse operation, Sarah received a call from Agent Reyes. "We found him," she said without preamble. Sarah sat down heavily. "The accountant, real name Marcus Webb. No relation to our detective Webb, thankfully. 47 years old, former forensic accountant with the IRS, went private about 8 years ago and gradually transitioned into criminal services. He has been running his operation out of a house in Buckhead, hiding in plain sight as a respectable business consultant." Sarah processed this. That is how he stayed hidden. He looked legitimate, exactly. No criminal record, no suspicious associations, nothing that would flag him for investigation. He just quietly provided services to people who operated in the shadows, keeping his own hands clean while enabling every kind of crime you can imagine. What happens now? Now we arrest him. Reyes paused. "I thought you might want to be there." The arrest was anticlimactic in the way that these things often were. Marcus Webb, the accountant, offered no resistance when federal agents arrived at his Buckhead home with warrants. He was a small man, unremarkable in every visible way, the kind of person you would pass on the street without a second glance. He said nothing during his processing, his expression blank, his eyes holding the calculating emptiness of someone who had always believed himself too clever to be caught. Sarah watched from a distance as he was loaded into a transport vehicle for the journey to federal detention. Beside her, Max sat with his usual patient attention, watching the proceedings with the same focused interest he applied to everything. "It does not look like much, does it?" Sarah said to no one in particular. "All that damage, all those lives destroyed, and he just looks like someone's accountant uncle." Agent Reyes appeared beside her. "That is the banality of evil for you. The most dangerous people rarely look the part." She turned to face Sarah directly. "The case against him is rock solid. The hard drives, the courier testimonies, the financial trails, everything connects back to him. He's going away for the rest of his life, and the network, it will take time to dismantle completely. We are still rolling up the client list, making arrests across multiple states. Some will escape, some will rebuild. But the infrastructure is broken, and that will take years to replace." She paused. "What you and Max did, it mattered. I want you to know that. Sometimes in this work it is hard to see the impact, hard to feel like anything we do makes a real difference. But 24 people are free because of what you found in that food truck. An entire criminal enterprise is collapsing because your dog smelled something that should not have been there. That matters." Sarah looked down at Max, who gazed back at her with those intelligent brown eyes that seemed to understand far more than any dog should. She reached down and scratched behind his ears, that simple gesture of connection that had come to mean so much over their years together. "He is a good boy," she said. "The best partner I have ever had. And Victor Harlan?" Reyes shrugged. "Cooperating witness. His testimony will be crucial in several prosecutions. When it is over, he will probably get probation, maybe some community service. He was a victim too, in his own way. The system chewed him up because he was desperate and vulnerable, exactly the kind of person these networks prey on." Sarah nodded, accepting this. Justice was rarely clean, rarely simple, rarely satisfying in the way that stories suggested it should be, but it was still worth pursuing, still worth fighting for, even when the outcomes were messy and the victories were incomplete. The sun was setting over Atlanta, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded Sarah of the evening they had hit the warehouse. The city sprawled before her. Millions of lives intertwined in ways they could never fully comprehend. Darkness and light existing side by side in the endless human drama. "Come on, Max," she said, turning toward her vehicle. "Let us go home." Max rose and padded alongside her, his tail wagging in that easy rhythm that meant contentment and trust, and the simple pleasure of being together. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them the same way they had faced everything else, side by side, human and dog, partners in the pursuit of something that might never be fully achieved, but was always worth chasing. The streets of Atlanta welcomed them as they drove through the gathering dusk, and somewhere in the city, 24 people were beginning the long process of rebuilding their lives. That, Sarah decided, was enough. For now, it was enough. In the weeks that followed Marcus Webb's arrest, the ripples of the investigation continued to spread. Federal prosecutors in 4 states filed charges against various members of his client network. International law enforcement agencies, informed of the connections revealed by the hard drives, initiated their own investigations in a dozen countries. The scope of the damage the accountant had facilitated became clearer with each passing day, and with that clarity came a sense of just how significant the intervention had been. Sarah testified in 3 preliminary hearings, recounting the sequence of events that began with a routine patrol at a food festival and ended with the dismantling of a criminal empire. She spoke about Max's alert, about the false compartment in the freezer, about the documents and data that had been hidden in plain sight. She answered questions from defense attorneys who tried to challenge the legitimacy of the search, the reliability of K-9 detection, the chain of custody of the evidence. Each time the facts held and the cases proceeded toward trial. Max, meanwhile, continued his work without any apparent awareness of his celebrity status within the department. He cleared vehicles and buildings, searched for missing persons, and provided the kind of presence at community events that reminded people why they trusted the badge. His nose had uncovered one of the most significant criminal networks in recent memory, but he seemed far more interested in the tennis ball Sarah kept in her pocket than in any accolades. 6 months after the food festival, Sarah received a letter. It came to her at the precinct, hand-delivered by a courier service, no return address. Inside was a single photograph and a handwritten note. The photograph showed a young woman Sarah did not recognize, standing in front of a small house with a garden, smiling at the camera. She looked healthy, happy, alive in a way that suggested she had found some measure of peace. The note read simply, "My daughter. She was in that warehouse. Because of you and your dog, she came home. I cannot repay this. I can only say thank you." Sarah stared at the photograph for a long time, feeling the weight of it in ways that statistics and case files could never convey. This was the reality behind the numbers, the human truth that existed beyond the operational reports and prosecutorial summaries. A daughter returned, a family restored, a life that would continue because Max had smelled something wrong in a food truck on a hot Saturday afternoon. She showed the photograph to Max that evening, holding it where he could see it, as if the gesture had any meaning to him. He sniffed it once, then looked at her with those patient eyes, waiting for whatever came next. "This is why we do it," she told him. "For moments like this." Max wagged his tail, and Sarah could almost believe he understood. The following spring brought changes to the K-9 unit. Several handlers retired, new teams were formed, and Sarah found herself in the unfamiliar position of being considered a veteran, someone whose experience and reputation warranted respect from younger officers still learning the craft. She thought sometimes about the accountant sitting in his cell awaiting trial, his carefully constructed life demolished by a dog's nose and a cop's persistence. She wondered if he ever reflected on the irony, if he recognized that his downfall had come not from the sophisticated law enforcement techniques he had spent years learning to evade, but from something as simple and ancient as a dog's ability to detect what humans tried to hide. Probably not, she decided. Men like Marcus Webb rarely achieved that kind of self-awareness. They continued to believe in their own superiority, even as the evidence of their failure surrounded them. Atlanta continued its ceaseless motion around her, the city that never quite stopped growing, never quite finished becoming whatever it was destined to be. Sarah found her place within its rhythms, marking time in calls, answered and cases closed, in the simple routine of partnership with a dog who had changed her life without ever knowing it. 1 year after the food festival, she received an invitation to speak at a law enforcement conference about K-9 detection and criminal investigation. She almost declined, uncomfortable with the spotlight, but the organizers mentioned that the presentation fee would be donated to a non-profit that helped trafficking survivors rebuild their lives. She accepted. The conference was held in a hotel ballroom. Hundreds of law enforcement officers from across the country gathered to learn and share and network. Sarah stood at the podium with Max at her feet, looking out at a sea of faces that reflected her own commitment to the work. She told the story of the golden grill, of Victor Harlan's trembling hands and the tall man's flat eyes, of a compartment hidden beneath frozen meat and the cascade of consequences that followed its discovery. She talked about trust and instinct, about the partnership between human and canine that could achieve what neither could accomplish alone. She talked about the 24 people in the warehouse and the photograph of a daughter returned to her family. When she finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Then the applause began, building into something that felt like recognition, like validation, like the acknowledgement of a truth that everyone present understood but rarely articulated. Sarah looked down at Max, who had slept through the entire presentation. She smiled and scratched behind his ears. "Good boy," she whispered. "The best boy." That night, back in their hotel room, Sarah sat by the window, watching the lights of the unfamiliar city spread out below. Max dozed on his bed in the corner, his paws twitching occasionally as he chased dream rabbits through imaginary fields. She thought about the paths that had led her here, the choices and chances that had shaped her career and her life. If she had been assigned to a different patrol that day, if Max had not alerted on that particular truck, if Victor Harlan had found the courage to refuse his handler's demands years earlier. So many variables, so many ways it could have gone differently. And yet here she was, on the other side of something meaningful. Her phone buzzed. A text from Agent Reyes. Webb pleaded guilty today. Life sentence, no parole. The network is finished. Sarah read the message twice, letting the finality of it settle into her consciousness. It was over. Not the work, never the work, but this particular chapter, this story that had begun with a dog's nose and a hidden compartment in a freezer. She typed a simple response. Good, justice served. Then she put down the phone and went to sit beside Max, placing her hand on his warm flank and feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. He stirred slightly at her touch, but did not wake, trusting her presence the way he had trusted her from the beginning. Outside, the city hummed with its endless activity, millions of stories unfolding simultaneously in the great human drama. Somewhere out there, people were making choices that would lead them toward light or darkness, toward freedom or captivity, toward the countless fates that awaited those who walked the edge between worlds. And tomorrow, Sarah and Max would return to the streets of Atlanta, ready to face whatever came next, partners in a mission that had no end but also no shortage of meaning. The work continued. It always continued. But tonight, just for a moment, she allowed herself to rest. The best stories, she reflected, were not the ones with perfect endings. They were the ones where imperfect people fought for something worth fighting for, where small actions cascaded into significant consequences, where dogs could smell secrets that humans tried to hide, and cops could follow wherever their partners led. This had been one of those stories. There would be others. Sarah closed her eyes and let sleep take her, knowing that Max would wake her if anything required attention, trusting the partnership that had carried them through darkness and delivered them to this moment of peace. Outside, the world turned on, but in this room, for these few hours, everything was exactly as it should be.